Who is Nietzsche's Zarathustra? Many commentators, thinkers, and artists have long contended on who Nietzsche's Zarathustra actually was. Heidegger, Carl Jung, they all went to great lengths to identify Nietzsche's Zarathustra. Nietzsche himself commentated on his own work in such ways. But there is one phrase within Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra, which to me aptly sums Zarathustra up. It's this: Zarathustra is the herald of the Superman. And we should hold on to that word, herald. It's an important word, a key word for us here. For the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans had a god who was the herald of the gods, and he was Hermes amongst the Greeks and Mercury amongst the Romans. And when the Romans came in contact with the Teutons, the Germans, the Germanics, which includes the Anglo-Saxons, of course, they described the Teutonic god Wodan or Wotan or Odin as being similar to their god Mercury. So we see a connection here immediately between Zarathustra, Mercury, and Odin, the messenger, the herald of the gods, or the herald of the supermen, the future gods of mankind, as Nietzsche would have it. So this is very significant for us here. And we see, for example, in the days of the week, we have amongst the English nations a day of Odin, a Woden's Day, a Wednesday, a Wednesday. And this is where the midday of the week, connected to Mercury, was translated, so to speak, into the day of Odin amongst the Germanic tribes. This designation of the days of the week, of course, goes back to the classical culture, which knew of the 7 planets that were then visible. So the days of the week were Sunday, named after the sun, of course, a star, not a planet, and we might be reminded there that Zarathustra begins with a prayer to the sun, which is "Thou great star." Then we have the moon, very much indicating the feminine principle, in Nietzsche at least, in Zarathustra. Monday, Moon Day. Then the day of Mars, the god of war, the planet Mars, which is translated amongst the Germanics to Tuesday, Tu, being the warrior god. And then we have the day of Mercury, which is, of course, Odin's Day amongst the English. And then we have the day of Jupiter. And of course, Jupiter, Zeus, is the king of the classical gods, and he is identified with Thor. So not Odin, but Thor. Modern pagans tend to put Odin in the place of Zeus as the king of the gods, but it seems amongst the practicing heathens, the Germanics, that in fact it was Thor who was the king of the gods, whereas Odin had very much the characteristics of the magician, of the ancient wise man, very much Zarathustrian. He loses an eye for wisdom and is the inventor of the runes, and so on and so forth. And the next day of the week is named after Venus, the goddess of love, which amongst the Germanics was the god Freya. Comes Friday, and then we have Saturn for Saturday, which remains Saturn in the Germanic pantheon. So therefore borrowing that deity from the classical world, which is interestingly based on Chronos and is therefore connected to time, and we might see a connection there with the eternal recurrence. So we can put very much the pagan pantheon around the concepts of Nietzscheanism, and we're reminded that Nietzsche was not an atheist in the negative sense, in the nihilistic sense, that Nietzsche was actually a religious atheist. In other words, he believed in the power of paganism, in demigods and gods and supermen and superheroes. These spirits very much inhabited his philosophy, which begins with Dionysus and ends with Dionysus. And we might say that Zarathustra is very much in the realm of Hermes, Mercury, and Odin, of course. And Nietzsche also believed that paganism, being the best religion, a polytheistic religion, should also be the religion of the tribe, of the culture, of the race, of the people. And so those who are of the Germanic descent, it is best for them to adhere to the Germanic gods and the Germanic ways. And similarly for those of Celtic background, Latin background, Greek background, etc., they should adhere to their own Germanic gods. And the classical writers were quite correct in connecting the different pantheons of the Germanics, of the Latins, and of the Greeks, and of the Celts, and seeing essentially that these were all very similar deities, different names for the same deity sometimes, all going back to the Aryan substratum, back to the Vedas and the Aryan invasions. So, in practical terms, I would say that Nietzscheanism is best furthered through a connection with heathenism and paganism, an intellectual connection, but also a cultural connection, also a day-to-day living connection with paganism and Nietzschean philosophy, where Nietzsche's Zarathustra can go alongside the poetic Eddas, the prose Eddas, the Icelandic sagas, and the general Teutonic pre-Christian writings, as well as remnants of those things found in fairy tales, in Grimm and so forth. And that we can see very much how we can widen out the understanding of Zarathustra through the Teutonic culture. We might look at the writings of Edred Thorson, real name Stephen Edred Flowers, who's written extensively on this culture, Germanic culture, also making connections with the Celtic cultures, and how this can be involved in one big philosophy, bringing in anything from the different god forms, which indicates the supermen, and cultural things like the runes and the sagas, And of course he did write, Nietzsche, did he not write, that the old Icelandic sagas are the best repository of master morality there is. So I don't think we can do much better than that. The works of Nietzsche, the Eddas, and the sagas. This is all we need to be Nietzscheans, tough Nietzscheans.